Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Hey, Bruce.
Hey, David. How are you doing today?
Good. A little bit of a gray day out there. I would, if you're listening to this podcast, remember the flowers are going fast for Mother's Day, so get on out there right away as quickly as you can. There's already pretty slim pickings. Bruce, how are you doing?
Well, getting by. It's 2 months now since life has been very normal, rocking the COVID beard. Haven't touched it. I had a nice haircut and clean shaven look there that week. I gave a talk to the astronomy club and since then I haven't, I was almost thinking I hadn't touched a hair on my head, but there was a few nose hairs that paid the ultimate price here a while back. But otherwise, I'm just...
That's too much information, Bruce.
Going for the Joe Thornton look. Although Joe himself, I guess, has taken on a new look lately. I figure if I live to be about maybe 200 years old, I might get that Thornton shaggy thing going.
I'd like to see the Brent Burns look on you, Bruce, like a little bit of the shaved sides of the head. The man bun and tattoos up and down the body there. That's what you got to go for.
Yeah, I'll stop brushing my teeth right away and start going for that.
Does he have bad teeth? Oh, he does.
That's part of the look.
He's got no teeth.
That's part of the look, yeah. He's
yes, he looks like Viking warrior circa 930 AD, Brent Burns. If he got off the ship with his knife, everybody ran. I've been watching Vikings, so it's on my mind here. I don't know if you ever watched that series. It's pretty good, especially the first two seasons.
Yeah.
All right, today we're going to talk about, because the NHL's talking about holding the draft.
Yeah.
We're going to dig into it. And initially, Bruce, so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a couple Bakersfield signings. We're going to look at the consensus picks of the experts for the draft and who might fall to the Oilers. They're going to look draft probably around number 20 if it proceeds as planned. You were kind of sour on the idea of the draft initially. I have to say that I was initially agnostic, didn't really care when they held the draft, although the reasons that you gave seem to make sense of not holding it. But I have to admit that now that they're going to, if they are going to hold it now, it doesn't bother me that much. I don't really care when they hold the draft. I think it's kind of fun to have something different to talk about for us, and maybe that's what they're thinking of, is give hockey fans some distraction, something to think about in the next little while rather than just this same old gloom and doom. So I guess I'm mildly in favor of it. Don't really give a hoot. I know that it changes it impacts the team significantly on whether they can make trades or not. And I think we may have talked about this. Like the Oilers might have traded any number of players, which they now won't be able to trade because they're heading into the playoffs.
Right.
But there's a bright side in Jesse Puljujarvi. If there's no trades allowed except for players outside the NHL, suddenly Jesse Puljujarvi's value shoots up. And Bob Stauffer and Mark Spector had an interesting segment on this where they were talking about it, and I wrote a post on it. And my conclusion is, like if instead of getting 1 or 2 draft picks for Puljujarvi, which I think would have been the maximum haul, maybe I don't think they could have got more than a second for him, Bruce, leading up to this. Now I think they might be able to get a second and a third and maybe another pick. Like if you're a team looking to improve and you can't trade for any of the veteran players, I mean, even if they allow the trade of veteran players, if they're heading into the playoffs, they're not going to be traded. That suddenly, if you're looking to improve your team, Jesse Puljujarvi looks like a pretty good idea for next season. Like, and if you're stocked up on picks, you got too many. If your intention was to use those picks to get players, then Jesse Puljujarvi makes a lot of sense. So I covered a lot of ground there. Has your thoughts changed on the draft, first of all?
Well, my thoughts have been, we'll take it as it comes, and we'll get our heads around it. I think, one thing's evident, that nothing is going to be normal. Exactly. I don't like the idea from a competitive perspective of having the draft before the playoffs. Like, that really upsets the apple cart and introduces a time warp into the processes. And you could say, well, it's unfair, equally unfair for all the teams, but actually that's not true. I mean, some teams are in a place where they need to rely on that draft. I mean, you got Montreal Canadiens with 14 draft picks. I don't suppose their plan was really to use all 14 picks. And I don't suppose their plan was to trade picks for prospects. They probably wanted to, maybe package two or three of them up and get a real player for the team. Same with Ottawa Senators that have 3 first-round picks and 4 more in the second round. That that's a lot of young players to be introducing into your system at one time. That, I mean, how do you find playing time for all those guys? So it might impact, how and where they draft guys from. That they don't necessarily, they might look away from the junior leagues and look more to college or overseas where they can leave players developing outside of their organization, or maybe, as you say, a 22-year-old, just turned 22-year-old Jesse Puljujarvi, who apparently has, had a fine season in the Finnish league. By all accounts, he's recovered his confidence and, more importantly to me, his joie de vivre, which was a huge part of what made him such an interesting player back in his junior days. And apparently he's rediscovered that. If I'm Ottawa and that guy is out there and say they're asking for my number 21 overall pick late in the first round, maybe I'm thinking about that trade, because you're getting now, instead of an 18-year-old who's way off in the future somewhere, you've already got a stack of them with all the other picks you got. Maybe you can move one of those picks, or maybe a couple of the second rounders, to get that player. And the Oilers might, try and work up a bidding war between, a couple of teams, Ottawa and Montreal being obvious choices, but any team that's sort of stacked up with draft picks might, that's a way to accelerate the process, right? So,
well, Nikita Gusev got a second round pick last year, didn't he not? From Vegas, wasn't that the price? But he's a little different because
he's quite a bit older.
He's older. So you, with Puljujarvi, you're trading for a player in his RFA years. You still have
Right.
4 years. So here's what I'm thinking, Bruce. When I think of, because we were just looking at all these players, right? And we know when you get it after the 10th pick in the draft, the odds of these players becoming really good NHLers goes down from about, maybe half, maybe out of the top 10 picks, about half those guys generally turn out to be pretty good NHL players. When you get past the top 10 picks, it gets to be more like 1 and 3, 1 and 4, second round, 1 and 5, 1 and 6. I think those numbers are, it's my cat wants in the room here.
I hear that.
So seriously, you look at Jesse Puljujarvi, what chance does he have at this point of being a second line winger in the NHL? I'd say it's about 1 and 3 shot of becoming that player still. I mean, he was, as a 21-year-old in Finland, he's a great big guy with a super skill set. I'd say he's got about a 33%, 1 in 3 chance of being a top 6 winger in the NHL still. And when you look at the odds of these picks between, let's say, below 15th in the first round, the odds are no better. Now, they might think they're better. Like, I know that there's this allure of the draft pick and the allure of the undrafted player and the potential of all that. But if you take a hard look at it, Puljujarvi has every bit as much of a chance as players taken after 15th of this draft of being a top 6 winger in the NHL, I think. And why not? And he's much closer to it if you're looking to improve right away. So I'm still hoping, Bruce, that he stays with the Oilers, because I think that holds true for the Oilers as well. This is a guy who could step into your top 9 quite easily next year and be a contributing hockey player. But if that's not going to happen, yeah, like I was thinking at most a second round pick for Puljujarvi last year, but I think his value's gone up because he played quite well in the Finnish league and he's a year older and he passed that test. So what do you think? Do you think that, I guess you were suggesting the same thing, a first round pick from Ottawa, 21st overall, might be in the cards, and I agree with you. Why not?
Yeah, well, as you say, if the trading of players is restricted, whether they actually put a formal restriction on trading roster players or simply the informal one that teams preparing for a playoff run aren't going to be trading guys out of their team, that makes the pool of sort of accessible players who could step in and help your team right away shrinks drastically. And Jesse Puljujärvi would be on that list of guys that are, ready for, he should be ready for the NHL by now. And it's from the sounds of things and from people who've been following him closely in Finland, he's turned things around in a couple of different ways, and especially just in outlook and attitude, and just rediscovering himself. And he's a different breed of cat, but as we've seen, when he's going good, that can be a very positive thing.
He can make plays. He skates. He's big. The guy can play hockey. I mean, I was sad to see him go. I believe he's an NHL hockey player. I believe he's likely a second-line winger. He's always been responsibly defensively. He's not this big, gaping, terrible hole on defense. He just was, I mean, they put him with Milan Lucic most of his minutes, and it was just terrible. What do you what's the highest, Bruce, would you say they could get? Like, if they were just to trade him for the highest possible pick, what do you think might be, if you were a GM and you have to justify it to your owner in your own mind, what's the highest you would give up as a GM?
Well, I think they can look in the back part of the first round. Like, I don't see 21 as being out of the question, but I mean, that's just a guess. But in this talk that he's automatically a second round pick now, that's a long way down from where they originally got him. And of course, he's going to be sold off at a discounted rate from what they paid for him. But I see potentially one late first rounder or two second rounders, or maybe a second and a third, or a couple picks. And the Oilers are short on picks, so I think there's a pretty good chance they're going to move on from this guy if they can't indeed convince him to come back.
Well, having looked at the forwards, and we're going to talk about some of these forwards available, and we were generally looking at players who are going to be drafted between 10 and 20. Right. It's who we looked at. And I don't think that he would be traded for one of those players. But anyway, I think from the Oilers kind of draft pick on, depending who's available, 20 and on, I think, is a good range for Puljujärvi. And I wouldn't be surprised to see a late first rounder. And I think that if you're an NHL GM, that's a good trade actually for you. I don't think that's a bad trade at all. You're getting a decent player there. Hey, Bruce, here's one thought. So in European soccer, they have something called the January transfer window. If you sign a player, and it's always just signings then, if you sign a player, then you're allowed to use that player for your regular season games, but not for your playoff games or for your Champions League games. Right. Champions League rosters are set.
Okay.
So if you they could open it up, I guess, to all players, but the player you trade for can't be used for the playoffs. That doesn't make sense. But here's one thought. Could they have it where you could trade for anybody, but the trade doesn't, the team that trades the player, let's say the Oilers were to trade Jujhar Khaira, the trade would not happen until after the playoffs. So they trade him for the draft. He's going, but he stays with the Oilers for the playoffs. Now, here's the precedent for that. Like, it's the transfer window in January wasn't a good, but Premier League teams transfer players for year-long transfers all the time. Right. And then that player plays against your team that year. Yep. So people can get their heads around different things in life. But you think, that could never happen. But actually, people can get their heads around things. Jujhar Khaira might understand that he would be leaving the team at the end of the playoffs. And there would be increased risk for the team getting him because he might be injured. And there might be a motivation issue with the player. He's unhappy. Uh-huh. But could that never happen? Is that completely off the table?
Well, yeah. The answer to that is have the darn draft after the playoffs. But, that might be a dead issue. But trading guys and then keeping them to play for you, I think that's fraught with the difficulties that the precedent I think of, and bearing in mind that 0 games were actually played in this time, but I think of poor Ladislav Smid, poor Andrew Calgiano, and poor Dustin Penner, all dangling in the wind for the entire month of July that the Oilers thought they had traded for Danny Heatley. And Heatley resolutely resisted their advances to convince him to come to Edmonton while they flew off to Kamloops, was it, to to sing through his bedroom window or whatever the hell they were doing out there. Anyway, it was an embarrassing situation, and the poor players were just, the Oiler guys, the would-be traded Oiler guys, that all wound up coming back to the team the next year, and I don't think that helped. And even though the situation was resolved long before a game was played, that no, the trade was off. But in the meantime, the names were out there, and it it it's a divided loyalty situation, as you say, and it would be really difficult for a guy playing in the playoffs, putting it all out there for his teammates that he knows he's going elsewhere at the end of the year, and it changes the priorities, changes the togetherness of the team a little bit. Like, I think there's issues doing it that way.
Yeah, I think it's highly unlikely. I think it's a highly unlikely scenario. But there's players, there's UFAs on a team who everybody knows he's not sticking around after the playoffs, and he plays, and it's no problem, right?
Hmm.
What's the difference on a certain level? It's they would take. It's highly unusual. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's impossible, but we'll leave it there. All right, Bruce. The Bakersfield Condors, a couple of minor league contracts. Jacob Stukel, and he's played with the team, I think, a couple of years now.
Yep.
He's a little buzzsaw of a fourth line winger. He's got some offense, hustles hard. AHL contract. And who else did they sign?
He's a former Calgary hitman, and one of those depth guys that he scored reasonably, but not great at the junior level. The other guy they signed was a defenseman, Yanni Kaldis, 24-year-old defenseman from U.S. College, that just like very similar to the four guys they signed there a month ago. And he was a four-year defenseman for Cornell University. And he's not a big guy. He's only 5'11", 187 pounds. Elite Prospects has him shooting right, but I'm pretty sure he's a left shot defenseman, which does change the equation in Bakersfield. They probably need a righty more than a lefty. And in Cornell, he's had some very good offensive numbers, including 28 and 24 points the last 2 years. This year,
how do you spell his last name, Bruce?
His last name is Kaldis, Kaldis. He was the captain of Cornell, and in 29 games, 5 goals, 19 assists, 24 points, just 4 penalty minutes, and plus 13. So solid boxcars as far as those go. And so he's just another in the line of AHL contracts that our colleague Kurt Levin suggested some time ago, that the Oilers would be doing more of those, not the Oilers, but the organization would be doing more of those AHL contracts and expending fewer spots on the 50-man list. And we're seeing that, with those college guys. We're seeing that with the young fellows, like the young guy they signed out of Medicine Hat there the other day, AHL contract, and also internal rehires within the AHL, of which Stukel is another. But they've already had Brad Malone, Luke Esposito commit to those deals. So they're going to have sounds like a higher proportion of their team that will be playing strictly on AHL or minor league contracts. James Hamblin, that was the young, the junior guy they just signed as well. And so what Kurt said was like the organizational plan going forward, it does seem to be crystallizing in terms of how Bakersfield is going about their business. And of course, overhanging all of this is the huge question marks over what a 2020-21 season would look like in the minor leagues, where they don't have a big TV deal and huge money interests, and they're much closer to being break-even operations. So I think there's going to be a trickle down on the minor leagues that has maybe changed the entire outlook of how things happen down there, but that's a question for the future. All they can do is prepare as if there's going to be a season.
listen, even the best AHL team has 6, 7 guys who are going to make the NHL.
Mm-hmm.
And you usually know who they are. Like, it's not a
Mm-hmm.
mystery about who's that going to be.
Yep.
And so the Oilers, they have their guys that they need to give lots of ice time to: Ryan McLeod and Raphael Lavoie and Maximov, Samorukov.
Right.
The new signing, what's his name? Lundstrom.
Yep.
Niemelainen.
Yep.
I mean, so that's who they're going to be working on. And these guys are going to fill in around. And Jacob Stuckel's a good little player, but the chances of him playing in the NHL are, one in 500.
Yeah, he's right there with Luke Esposito, a good solid minor league player, and you need some of those to have a competitive program.
Yeah.
So that's just, taking care of business. And the guy out of Cornell, I mean, those guys they signed 5 of them. Maybe one of them surprises them, and next year they upgrade him to a 2-way deal because they see a potential in that guy, right? I mean, that's what happened with Logan Day, is it not? And it's certainly the Oilers have past history with guys like Mark Arcobello and Josh Curry, who originally signed minor league deals and later upgraded to NHL deals and later actually played for the Oilers in the NHL. Neither made a huge impact, but they actually were able to make that step up from sort of low profile prospect to actually made the show.
Caldas does shoot left, by the way. You're right about that. And it makes me wonder if Bakersfield is going to sign, like, it looks like they needed a veteran defenseman, right? To round out this group. Well, maybe Caldas is it. I mean, so they got Lundstrom, Niemelainen, Samorukov, Janis Jacks, he's another UFA college free agent, Desharnais, and Bouchard on their defense, as far as I can tell. And now they have Caldas. So that's 7 guys. Maybe they're not going to bring in that veteran guy that they have to pay $300,000 or $400,000 to this year, and they're just going to go and say, okay, Lundstrom, Niemelainen, you're the veterans, and Evan Bouchard, you're the veteran, and Samorukov, you're the veteran. There's your guys, and fill in around that. That seems to be the plan at this point. And maybe they're not bringing back Josh Curry. They haven't signed him yet, Bruce.
No, they have not, and he is unrestricted. So he's a different. I think he's a Group 6, and he's or else no, maybe he is turned 27. Anyway, he's unrestricted, and so unless they can convince him to be Brad Malone, or if they want to spend another spot on the 50-man list, but that the clock is ticking on that.
Yeah, they're not going to do that. It would be an AHL contract for Curry, I'm pretty sure at this point. All right, Bruce, let's move on to the draft. And what I've done is, and this is other people have done this. My NHL draft's done it, and usually they don't have a list this year though. But the Brad McPherson of the Blue Bullet Report does this, and it's essentially you put together a list of all the different experts and pundits who are making their own lists. Yep. And this ranges from like people who do this professionally, like Bob McKenzie and Craig Button, to people who don't do it professionally. They just do it for their avid, passionate fans, like Sean Patrick Ryan, who writes for the Cult of Hockey now and then and does his own list. And I haven't added him yet, but I have 15 lists so far. Wow. And I'm going to probably be adding about 5 more. And what you get is kind of the wisdom of the crowd, I guess, wisdom of the expert crowd, and who they think they're valuing all the different players. They're not trying to say where they're going to be drafted, although Bob McKenzie's list is more that. I don't think he's trying to rate them on their talent as more where they will be drafted, if I'm not mistaken about Bob McKenzie's list. He's trying to talk to maybe he is just trying to get the consensus value from the experts. That's what because he talks to NHL scouts, and he's trying to get kind of where the scouts think the players rank. So he's actually also rating them on value, not where they would go on the draft. But other people use different approaches, Bruce. What are some of the different approaches that different people use in compiling their lists?
Well, my good friend Alan Lowtide Mitchell, he compiles a very detailed, like, top 100 list, and he relies quite heavily on what he calls math. Like, he deliberately goes against the seen 'em good reports that says what kind of numbers do these guys post, and how does their production in junior compare to, to what they eventually accomplish. And what he does to follow up on that is that he goes back over past years and looks at, for instance, the Oilers. Well, obviously his blog focuses on the Oilers, who the Oilers picked versus who was the top player available on his list as each of these picks was taken. And he's quite open about when his list is second best. He'll say so, and when sometimes his list produces a gem that the Oilers overlook, such as I believe Alex DeBrincat being sort of a poster boy, the kind of guy that put up huge numbers, and there was reasons, him being tiny being the main one, of why he went down to number 39 overall in the real draft. And Lowtide's just saying, well, maybe we should believe the numbers, not just these consensus seen them good things. And of course, as usual, the truth no doubt lies somewhere in the middle. But that's how, I mean, unless you're somebody who can see all 100 guys play, I don't know how you can go with seeing them good unless you're relying on the reports of other people and already your secondhand reports. So Mackenzie, I mean, what Bob does is very similar really to what you're doing here, or I did the same thing myself for the Nugent Hopkins and Yakupov draft, compiled a number of lists and just made a table like this showing where the guys were ranked, what the average was, and often you see a single consensus player emerges at the very top of that list where everybody basically agrees, as again we have this year with Alexis Lafreniere. Anyway, Bob uses 10 scouts, I believe, and then he just generates an average, and then you've used Bob as one of your 15, and you've generated another average. And this is just, overall ranking. It's not rocket science, but it's a nice way to at least it kind of brings the outliers into put some more, the guys. I mean, Craig Button, a very interesting. He always produces an interesting list, but he always has some real outliers. Guys he ranks way higher than anybody else.
And he's done
guys
it again.
He ranks way lower than everybody else. And I admire that. He has the courage of his convictions. He's not just trying to, reshuffle the same general list. But when you have this many, you'll sort of smooth out those outliers and I think get a pretty true picture of how players are generally looked at by the community of draft rankers. This is different from NHL scouts and NHL lists. They do their things entirely different, but it gives us a good sort of general overlying picture of who's going to go where. That if we're looking for who might go at number 20, well, there's no point in looking at Alexis Lafreniere. At the same time, it sort of gives us a range of guys to look at as we've briefly done for this podcast.
So, for instance, last year, Philip Broberg, according to the consensus of all these draft experts, was going to go 13th overall, and the Oilers, by the definition, they reached for him, right, when they took him. Was it 8th?
Yeah.
Who else did they take last year? Oh yeah, Lavoie. Just check that. Raphael. So Raphael Lavoie, I think, was at 38th overall. The Oilers took him?
Yes.
And he was 19th overall, according to the consensus. So it's just kind of nothing else interesting. And so I'm going to keep doing this in years to come. And over a number of years, it'll be interesting to see. This will also be a good way to rate the raters, right? To see which of the people who rate. It's just good to have a compendium of how all these people did over time. And I mean, you could go probably back in time and create these lists. It's pretty time intensive to make this list, though. I have to say, it took me like 10 hours to put all the numbers down. Yeah, it's like a lot of numbers you're inputting off people's lists, and maybe not 10 hours, maybe 6 or 7, but it took a while. So this year, Bruce, the lists, we've heard this is a really good draft. Like, so maybe instead of getting 20 to 25 really good NHL players out of this draft, there's going to be 30 or 35 that'll come out of it. And there's lots of good forwards. And it looks like the Oilers are going to take a forward this year. Why do you think the Oilers are looking at a forward this year as opposed to a defenseman?
Well, simply put, because they took defensemen each of the last 2 years. So, I mean, they got Evan Bouchard at 10 overall 2 years ago, and they got Philip Broberg, number 8 overall. So those were, each top 10 draft choices. Before that, they concentrated largely on forwards. Since Darnell Nurse in 13, they took forwards 4 years in a row. Draisaitl and McDavid were obviously home runs. Puljujarvi, well, we're still talking about that guy. Yamamoto's looking better and better. And at number 20, where they are now, just looking at the organizational depth, like last year they went best player available, and according to Ken Holland and crew, that was Philip Broberg. But I'd be shocked if it was a defenseman for a third straight year. I really think they will be addressing the forward ranks, and more likely a winger than a center is my guess, but they might take the best forward available.
I think they will, Bruce. I don't think they'd worry about that. I mean, you can always change a winger to usually the centers are better defensive players, so it might, unless it's locked in stone that someone wants to play center. Mm-hmm. I just, they took Ryan McLeod with a high pick, second round pick, even though he's a center, and he was they had Draisaitl and McDavid then, so I think they could easily take a center. So there's a number of players. I don't think they're going to be taking a goalie. There is a goalie, Yaroslav Askarov, who's rated very highly, a Russian goalie. Excuse me. I really am in the camp of don't use a first round pick on a goalie. And I'm saying this is coming from the Oilers history. Grant Fuhr was taken with a high pick and a very high first round pick, and he obviously panned out, but I'm not in the camp, especially these days I haven't done the numbers lately, but I don't think that you get a very good payoff, generally speaking, from risking that top pick on a goalie, and good goalies come out of everywhere and nowhere and here, there, and everywhere. And I just don't think that's a good way to spend your pick. So I don't think they're going to take Askarov. What do you think? If he's there?
I'd be surprised. I mean, we haven't seen the full Ken Holland playbook yet. But they've I don't think that, I think he took Mrazek when he was in Detroit, but it wasn't like that was a huge focus. I don't think he's unhappy with the goalies he got now, other than he knows that by the time whoever he picks will be ready, at least one of them will have moved on. But I'd be surprised. I mean, Askarov, goalies in the first round are that's rolling the dice. Last time Oilers did it, Devin Dubnyk, they actually got a good NHL goalie who's gone on to have a pretty solid career. Part of it in Edmonton, but I just don't see that being the priority for the organization that getting a good forward would be.
Okay, so the Red Wings did draft the goalie first overall in 2008, Tom McCullum. Who played with the Guelph Storm and played 3 NHL games. Wow. Just let me go back a little further.
First round, eh?
They generally drafted goalies 80th or lower in the draft after the McCullum pick. They drafted in 2003 Jimmy Howard. Oh, it was their first pick, but just 64th overall.
Right.
So and that one turned out. Maybe having that one turn out maybe encouraged them to then think, oh, that's top pick, let's take McCullum. But most NHL teams have looked at the analytics on this, I believe, and it's pretty rare now. I think it was much more common in the past to see first goalies taken in the first round. It's pretty rare now, and I think it's rare for a reason, because people realize that it's not the best. It's not the price you want to pay on that kind of bet.
Oh, that's right. I mean, and let's remember, Ken Holland is himself an old goalie.
Yeah.
But I think he's a newer manager than he is a goalie. Let's put it that way. And I think he'll look up front.
All right, on this year's list, so there's a lot of forwards right at the top. There is a huge consensus, Bruce, with the top 8 players in this draft. Like almost all of the rankers have the top 8 players in a different order, and only the same 8 guys, just in a different order, slightly different order, not even that different an order, and they are Alexis Lafreniere, Quinton Byfield, Tim Stoltze, Lucas Raymond, Alexander Holtz, Jamie Drysdale, Marco Rossi, and Cole Perfetti. All of those players, except for one, are forwards. They're all generally the same size, except for Quinton Byfield, who is like of Eric Lindros proportions and of style of play. And he's one of the late birthdays in this group. He's an August birthday.
Right.
A lot of them are smaller forwards, highly skilled, born earlier in the draft year, which is like September, October birthdays. But after that, Bruce, you get to a group of players who might fall to the Oilers. And so we've kind of cut that off. We're looking at Dawson Mercer, Connor Zary, Jack Quinn, Dylan Holloway, Nolan Gunler, Rodion Amarov, Maverick Bork, and Seth Jarvis, I believe, are the players we're going to talk about today as possible first-round draft picks for the Oilers. And all of those players are actually ranked higher than 20th on the consensus list. But my guess is one of them would be there to fall for the Oilers. Right. Out of that many players, one of those guys at least is going to be available for the Oilers. That doesn't mean their Oilers are going to take that guy. Maybe they're going to so-called reach and take someone ranked lower down. So why don't we start, Bruce? Who's your first guy? The highest guy on that list is who is it?
Jack Quinn.
Jack Quinn. What do we know? So what we're going to just talk briefly about the stats of the player, and maybe a comment from one of the scouting guys, and do it that way. So what do you know about Jack Quinn, just briefly?
Well, he's a right shot right winger. He ranged on your list anywhere between rated 6 all the way down to 23. In Ottawa 67s, he played 62 games, scored 52 goals, 37 assists, and plus 48. I mean, he had a very splendid stats. He is a second half of September birthday in 2001, meaning he's September 19th. He's almost among the very oldest players first time eligible for this draft, because he would have been 4 days short of qualifying for last year's draft. So he's putting up goals at the rate, at a very good rate, but you have to think of him as being more a 19-year-old than an 18-year-old, more of an 18-year-old than a 17-year-old at this point. But he's, according to Low Tide, he points out also he's a September 2001 who kept scoring goals all year. His NHL equivalent, and this is the numbers that Low Tide works to, is he uses a coefficient for each league to translate the point scoring in that league to what a player would score in 82 games at the NHL level. That's using coefficients established by Rob Vollman, a longtime stats analyst who now works for the LA Kings. And he says his NHL equivalent is 38 points, which is great for an 18-year-old player. You don't, unless you're talking about McDavid, you don't often see these guys much above 40 for equivalency at that age. And he lots of buzz about this player. I've heard more than a few people talk about him.
The only thing that worried me about him, Bruce, is this: he played on an absolutely stacked Ottawa 67s team.
Yeah. And
when we look at players who have scored well in junior, and some of them who haven't scored that well in the NHL, and for me, Sam Gagner is kind of the top of that list. Sam Gagner in a similar situation was on an absolutely stacked. When you London Knights team with Patrick King.
Same team as Robbie Schremp, London Knights.
So of the top players for points per game scoring out of the CHL since 2005, since that lockout, I've maintained a chart since then. So Sam Gagner ranks 6th. He had 2.13 points per game. He was an August birthday. Like, you just think, like, this guy is a point scoring machine. Like, that's at the same level of scoring as players like Mitch Marner, Matthew Tkachuk, and this year Marco Rossi and Alexis Lafreniere. They're right at this, all the same group together, all at that same level of scoring. You'd think Sam Gagner was a sure thing, but no, he had that. So maybe probably shouldn't apply that to Quinn, but it's kind of in the back of my mind. Like, one of the warning signals to me is if a player on a stacked team has that inflated his point totals, where he's jumped from a low first round pick to a mid first round pick just because of that. And I think that's a possibility. But I'm not speaking about Quinn. I'm just saying generally, right. That's a possibility. I can't speak to this player. I can't speak to any of these players. I've never seen them play very much. But just knowing what I know, that's kind of leapt out at me a little bit. So,
well, Marner and Tkachuk, like Shrimp and Gagner, all played for that powerhouse London Knights program that's had so many strong teams over the year. Sean Patrick Ryan, the Oil Knight, his outlook just says, stylistically, Quinn reminds me an awful lot of Kyle Connor. That sounds good. He likes to score, he knows how to score, and he scores a lot. He should be a bona fide NHLer. Just a slight bit leery that he's one of the oldest prospects in the draft and played on such a strong OHL team.
Same. That's why I've probably read his thing, and that triggered it as well, because I did read Sean's list yesterday, and Sean's got a pretty good eye. Like, he's picked out some pretty decent players in recent years. Bruce, my first player is it's not the highest ranked player. He's actually ranked 22nd. He's one of the lower players on our list. Hendrix Lapierre. And he's a very interesting player because he's one of the ones where there's this huge variance in terms of what the experts think of him. And this is because this year he only played 19 games and he had 3 concussions in this past year. So he's a 6'1", 181 forward from the Quebec Chicoutimis of Saguenayens of the Quebec League. 17 points in 19 games. So man, that sounds super risky, but some of the people are really high on him. Craig Button has him, I think, 9th. If I'm not mistaken, Button has him 9th. Just have a quick look. There's a 10th. Yeah, 10th on his list. That's the highest someone has him rated. And what Button said is, Lapierre is the wild card of this draft. I should probably have him higher based on his potential because I think he's a top 5 player if he can return to full health. He's the best two-way player in the draft.
Wow.
He's the best two-way player in the draft. So that's, who else, we've seen players have lots of concussions and come back from that. Sidney Crosby, most prominent example, but we've also seen players have their careers constantly ended by injury.
3 concussions and as an underager. He does have the best first name in the draft, Hendrix, with an X. Gotta like it.
Yeah. So, you have to feel sorry for the young man. It's such a big moment of his life. This is, of course, the tragic story of hockey. Injury, a great player after great player,
so many juniors
injured, set back by injury, and it's a very rough physical game. So, who do you got next?
Okay, I got Connor Zary, a right shot center that played for Kamloops in the Western League this year. 57 games, 38 goals, 86 points. So very good production. 1.5 per game, plus 30. He's average. None of these guys, at least on my list, are very big. 6 foot, 181 pounds. He is also a late. I always get this backwards: late versus early. He's one of the oldest players in the draft with a
late September
25th, 2001 birthday, and he is. So he'll still be. He's been 18 the entire season. And so again, a guy that's maybe ahead of his uh, of his peers for that reason. Um, Low Tide, who has him ranked at number 12 on his list, says he's a two-way center who's likely to top out as a top six forward, and he's a good bet by this point in the first round, meaning the Oilers spot in the first round if he goes if he's available. So,
And on the consensus rankings, he's 12th overall. And he's in the top 10 for McKean's hockey. And Draft Geek has him the lowest at 28th. Bruce, so in terms of his point scoring, he averaged 1.51 points per game.
yeah.
And so if we look historically, players in that range are Sam Bennett, Jacob Voracek, Nail Yakupov, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Pierre-Luc Dubois, and Ryan Strome. So we see an extremely good level of scoring. Like I don't know what his NHLE is. Maybe you want to look that up.
37.
37, did you say?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a very strong NHLE, right? Like for what's the highest NHLE? Do you know what the highest one is? It would be
Lafreniere was 50.
50. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a really high NHLE. You'd get higher than that, like Connor McDavid, I think, had one in the 60s.
67 or something like that.
Yeah.
It's way off the charts.
But if you're getting above 35, above 30, above 30 is pretty good, is it not? And above 30, anything above 35, that's pretty good. And we could just see from that list of players, if that kind of guy falls to the Oilers at 20th overall, that's a moment to celebrate, because there's a lot of I actually really believe in the numbers as well in terms of point scoring. Point scoring is just such a great stat to chart offensive ability. And it's been such a great, durable stat forever, and it still is. It really does capture the significant contributions, generally speaking, to the most important event of the game, a goal. And so it's a pretty trustworthy indicator of who's going to, if you just went by points, and that's kind of what Low Tide's doing, you're not going to go wrong very often in terms of making the best bet you could possibly make in that moment. Alrighty, let's go to my next guy, Seth Jarvis. And for some reason, irrationally, this is the player I want the Oilers to draft, Bruce. I can't. Every year I have some player who irrationally, because I don't watch these players. I don't know these players, but for some reason I always glom onto one and think, oh, I hope the Oilers get him. It's just I don't know why. A grave character defect, no doubt. But I'm secretly hoping, openly hoping the Oilers draft Seth Jarvis. And it's because he averaged a goal a game in his last 30 games or something like that. And so I see kind of value that of course the NHL scouts are going to be aware of this. He's not going to have some kind of secret value. So the scouts actually have Seth Jarvis rated 19th. So that right within the Oilers' wheelhouse. And here's what Sean Patrick Ryan, who's more bullish on the player than anyone. He has him 9th. And maybe because I read this too, and I know that Sean's got a really good eye for talent. He says, quote, Jarvis is an absolute workhorse and a very talented playmaker. He processes the game quickly, even at high speeds. He's such a terrific skater. He doesn't break stride, even with the puck. Loves to take the puck hard to the net off the rush. He plays with a ton of energy and pace. It's really tough for defenders to handle. Great hands in tight, displays great vision and poise with the puck. Dynamic offensive threat, but also versatile, capable of playing multiple roles. And he compares him to Kailer Yamamoto and Matthew Barzal, who went about, I think he went 15th or 16th, right? Barzal, 16th in his draft.
Famously.
The other thing about Seth Jarvis is he was, unlike Quinn, who played on a team that scored a ton of goals, Seth Jarvis led his Portland Winterhawks by 28 points. He had 98 points in 58 games, and the next guy, Jaden Duro, had 70 points in 61 games. So he was playing on a non-powerhouse scoring team. And I think that's, if you can put up points in that situation, that I put a little bit more value in that. His scoring, Bruce, he was at 1.69 points per game. Mm-hmm. So the players in that range are Nathan MacKinnon, Sam Reinhart, Dylan Strome, Steve Stamkos, Nikolai Ehlers, and Tyler Seguin.
I've heard of those guys.
Maybe that's why I'm secretly hoping that they draft this player. That's why. That's my reason. Maybe I'm not so irrational after all.
Yeah, it might be irrational to think he's ever going to get down to number 20, but as we're saying all along, one or two of these guys is going to trickle down because, there's a lot of good players, and the Oilers are got a decent spot in the pecking order.
Why so many good players? Like, there's lots of guys with these incredible scoring numbers that we're looking at.
Yeah.
And the Oilers I think the Oilers are going to get one of these guys. I mean, it will take on it. For that to happen, it's going to take some team's going to have to gamble on Yaroslav Askarov, the goalie, and there's going to have to be a couple defensemen drafted, and they're going to have to then also go for the European forwards, and maybe the Oilers are going to go for one of these European forwards, who are also really highly rated. Who's next for you?
I've got Noel Gunler, a Swede, 6'2", a right shot guy who can play either wing, apparently. Wide range of opinion on this guy, rating all the way from 10 to 45. He played this season with Luleå in the Swedish Hockey League, and he also played a part of last season with Luleå. So he's already got sort of a top-level pro experience. 6'2", 174 pounds. Again, a 2001 birthday, October. So again, he'll be one of the older players in the draft. But the Oilers have shown an affinity for drafting late birthday types in the past, so they won't shy away from that. I mean, that just means they're closer to being ready for the NHL. Now, his scoring wasn't much of it. 49 games, 4 goals, 9 assists, 13 points, plus 12. But playing in a depth spot on the roster. He's got a little bit of a rep, and apparently he's been cut from a couple of Swedish teams, including their World Junior team this year, which was a little shy on offensive talent, and yet he got cut for reasons that aren't entirely clear. But Sean Patrick Ryan says there's been talk of issues off the ice in the past, which is why he's been left off Sweden's national team several times. Can't speak to whether it was maturity issues or just inconsistencies in his game, but if coaches don't trust him for whatever reason, it's something I want to know more about before drafting him. He says he's a risky pick for him in the top 15, but if all goes right, he should be a fine NHL player one day. And Low Tide says ranking Gunler 14th, young winger has a great release and impressive resume, but is only an average scorer in the Swedish Hockey League. So.
All right. I'm next guy on my list is a Russian forward. He's 17th overall on the consensus list, Rodion Amirov, and he's as high as 7th. Steve Kornianis of the draft analyst has him 7th, and as low as 44th. That's on Prospect Pipeline, has him at 44th. So he's another one of these European players are a little harder to rank, at least for fans who know nothing like me, just going by the stats, because they often play a significant amount of the season of their draft year, if they're really good, in the men's league, and they get no playing time. So this guy played 21 games for Salavat Uleva Ufa, and he got 2 assists. So, but I'm guessing he hardly played at all. I mean, you can look it up. We'll probably do a deeper dive into each of these players, and we'll do that at that point. But yeah, he also played though in the MHL, which I think is their top junior league, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe it's their version of the AHL. I'm not sure. But he played 17 games and had 22 points, and he also made their U20 team. As in his draft year, he made the Russian U20 team and played 7 games and had 3 points. I'm guessing that's at the World Junior Tournament. So let me just check, see if that's the case. So Let's go to what Sean Patrick Ryan had to say about Amirov. Amirov is smart, fast, skilled, and owns a high work ethic. In other words, he's my kind of player. His hockey IQ is quite often mentioned as one of his best qualities, but he's also a beast with the puck. He's solid in all three zones and plays a very consistent all-around game. In terms of puck protection, I think @Hockey Prospects on Twitter said it best. Quote, you have to kill him to get the puck off him. That's interesting.
He must still have it then.
Yeah. He's still alive, you're right.
Well, he's still on the list, yeah.
Highly skilled player, very quick set of hands, equally dangerous as a scorer or playmaker. And yeah, so that's pretty high praise. Of course, you know, there's been, it's probably not even fair to say this, but there has been some fairly high flubs in terms of out of the Russian leagues in recent years. So, you know, what was the last guy?
Boom or bust.
Of course, Neil Yakupov played over here. I don't see the Oilers taking a rush. There's got to be some kind of organizational, lasting organizational PTSD over the Yakupov pick. I wonder if that still exists within the Oilers organization. Of course, all of those people are all gone, so who knows? Maybe they're going to draft this kid. He sounds like a fantastic young hockey player, so if they take him, I'll be thrilled, I'm sure. Who do you got next?
I got Mavrik Bourque. Mavrik, Mavrik. Never seen that name before. Bourque of Shawinigan in the Quebec League. He's a right shot center, 5'10", 165. He is a 2002 birthday, but early January. So at least he's, you know, he would at least have 2 years of junior eligibility remaining. In Shawinigan, he scored 29 goals, 42 assists, 71 points in 49 games. So very productive, almost a point and a half per game. Low Tide describes him as a creative center with great hands, great passer, great shot. That's a lot of greats there, Alan. NHL equivalent of 33 points. And he says, I think he might be available when Edmonton chooses in the first round. And he's certainly right in the ballpark, because if you look at the Elite Prospects page, which just lists kind of the same thing you did, ranked 21 by hockeyprospect.com, 18 by Future Considerations, 22 by McKean, 17 by EliteProspects.com. So he's right around that 20 area. So there's a pretty good chance that he will still be on the board, but near the top of it when it comes to the Oilers' turn.
What's his NHLE?
His NHLE, I think, was 33. Was it not? Yes.
And could you look up Amirov? I'd be interested to see. And what did you say? Did you tell us what Gunler's NHLE is? And what are Gunler's and Amirov's?
Gunler, I'm not sure we have an NHLE, but I know he only scored 13 points in the Swedish league.
Do they not do them for the Swedish league?
Yeah, they do, but I'm reading off of Low Tide's list, and he didn't list them for every single guy.
Oh, okay.
But it would be in the Swedish league's pretty high, but I mean, he only scored 13 points, so he might have it for an 82 game NHL season. It would be under 20, I'm pretty sure, just under 20.
And Amirov only had 2 points. It's not really fair to even with that. So
yeah, it's meaningless.
Yeah, it really is. Okay, my next player is Dawson Mercer. Dawson Mercer. And he is the highest ranked player on our list, Bruce. Mm-hmm. He's 11th overall. And a number of people have him at 11th, and no one has him lower than 24th in the draft. So sounds like he's the least likely player to fall to the Oilers. And let me just see what... here's what Cam Robinson of Dauber Hockey has to say about Dawson Mercer. Intelligent, play-creating winger, makes the hard plays, but can also dazzle with his puck skills. Two-step quickness, already showing improvements, wears opponents down. And he, in terms of his point scoring, he's at 1.3 points per game. And the players around him, surrounding him on the list in that same range are Jeff Skinner, Logan Couture, Michael Dalcole, Mavrik Bourque, Jack Quinn, both players we talked about earlier, Dawson Mercer, Philip Zadina, Evander Kane, Nazem Kadri, Josh Bailey. So again, there's just a whole plethora of players here. And on my list, I didn't leave out players who didn't pan out. Like
Right.
it's anyone who scored at this level.
Right.
There's a good chance that a player who's scored at this level is going to be a decent NHL player. The only player that I mentioned who isn't in that category, the only two are Michael Del Cole, who still might be, I guess, hasn't
Maybe.
worked out so far, and Philip Zadina, who's a better bet.
He's still young, yeah.
He's still young. He's not off. He's kind of off to a Puljujarvi like beginning of his career, Philip Zadina. So, kind of underwhelming in the first 2 years, but could still easily become a very good NHL player. Almost, and the rest of the guys almost all are. So again, he's the most unlikely to fall if you go by the consensus rankings. Who do you got?
I have Jan Mysak from Litvinov of the Czech Republic. 6 foot, 181. Now he's the youngest of the guys on my list with a June 24th birthday, meaning that he's still 17 as we speak, and all the other guys are already 18 and have been for a while. He played half the year with Litvinov in the Czech League, 26 games, 5 goals, 4 assists. Then he came over and played for Hamilton. After the World Junior, he came over and played for Hamilton, and he played 22 games, 15 goals, 25 points. So he started to light it up right away in the OHL. Again, according to Sean Patrick Ryan, he's an excellent all-around player who appears to be underrated by many. He was easily the Bulldogs' best player most nights, averaged over a point a game. Not only is he highly skilled, but he works hard and is reliable in all 3 zones. Played both penalty kill and power play in OHL. Effective at both. Now, I don't think they had a very strong team there in Hamilton. He says, for me, Mysak has more potential than most because he's relatively young compared to his peers and still appears to be a bit raw physically. I see him as a center in the NHL based on how well he sets up his teammates and attacks the middle of the ice. I've heard a lot of Thomas Hertl comparisons, and I can definitely see that in many ways. He also reminds me a bit of, wait for it, Leon Draisaitl. If he adds a bit of mass and gains even another step, he could be an unstoppable force given his already developed skill set. So he's his top 10 talent in his mind. Now, he's 181 pounds, and I don't think Leon Draisaitl ever played under 200 as even a developing prospect. So that's a bit of a stretch to me. Like he can't quite play the power game at that size, but that's a very nice comparison all the same.
Yeah, when Leon Draisaitl was 10, I think he was probably 180 pounds. Dylan Holloway is the next player on my list, Bruce.
Uh-huh.
And he played at the University of Wisconsin. He is from Bragg Creek, Alberta, 6'1", 203 pounds, so a bigger guy, and he takes penalties too. So I think of a bit more of a rugged player here. And so he played for the Okotoks Oilers previous to this in 2018-19, and 88 points in 53 games for the Okotoks Oilers. And then he took the college route, went to the University of Wisconsin, 17 points in 35 games for the University of Wisconsin, which is not bad for an NCAA rookie. Cole Caulfield was on that team, and a year older, and he put up 36 points in 36 games. He was the top scorer on that team. But they had Cole Caulfield, Alex Turcotte, who was a first-round last year as well, 26 points in 29 games. So they had someone called Roman Akan. They had about 5 forwards who are getting more points, but also probably more ice time than Holloway. So here's what Corey Pronman of The Athletic has to say. Holloway's freshman season has gone just okay. And this he was writing at the end of January, Pronman was. I think he's played a bit better than his stat line suggests, but he hasn't been a top offensive player at the college level after being a top player at the AJHL level. Holloway is a very good skater who has a lot of energy to his game. He's not the strongest player yet, but he engages in physical play. His offensive upside is the main point of debate surrounding him when talking to NHL scouts. I like his stick skills and brain. I would not call his puck game top end or a true top playmaker at the NHL level. However, I do think he can make enough plays at the higher levels to play in a team's top 6 in second power play. So, it's interesting when players change leagues, eh? Like there's always that changing league thing. And with Jan Mysak, it's interesting that he went to the OHL and immediately did very well. And it sounds like Holloway he did well, but not really well when he made that very big jump of playing against, 16, 17, 18-year-old, 19-year-old players in the AJHL to playing against 18 to 24-year-old players
Right.
in college hockey on a stacked team where he wasn't necessarily first in the pecking order. So,
well, I had 2 first-round draft picks from last year on that
yeah.
team. And, of course, the older players as well. In fact, Kandre Miller, he's a defenseman. But, man, they had a load of guys from that U.S. national team. So there was probably with those young guys ahead of him in the pecking order, that, he may have not been gifted a lot of ice time, because I'm sure the coach would mixed in some of his older guys as well with those with Caulfield and Turcotte. So, not having watched Wisconsin play a game, mind you, so that's just an educated guess on my part.
Caulfield's an interesting one, and there's still lots of people that are really sore that the Oilers didn't take Cole Caulfield with their top pick. But I think Broberg had a pretty good season. I'm not against Philip Broberg. That guy's got a lot of talent. So, Bruce, I think that's it for today.
Okay, covered a lot of ground there, David.
Yeah,
and I'm sure we're all going to learn more and more about these guys as things shape up, and especially once the NHL makes an announcement one way or another in terms of when they're going to have the draft. That will change the focus of not just us and what we're doing, but also in the interest levels of, when the draft is imminent. Nothing is of more interest to people than the potential players that might be picked by your team. So that's where we're going to continue to focus.
Just lots and lots of really high-end scoring talent that could fall to the Oilers here. And it's a good year to be drafting 20th overall, because you're likely to get one of these players. And if you go by pedigree, scoring point pedigree, lots of talent there.
Well, the last 3 times the Oilers picked around number 20, they took Jordan Eberle at 22 in 2008. They took Oscar Klefbom at 19, 2011, and they took Kyler Yamamoto at 22 in 2017. So they got 3 NHL players out of that. I mean, everything we've seen of Yamamoto is he's here to stay. And the other guys obviously have proven to be long-term NHL players. So the Oilers have actually done pretty well around the number 20 spot. Historically, their trouble has been in the number 30 to 200. I think anywhere outside the first round is where they've had trouble, but they've actually made their later first round picks count by and large. I guess Riley Nash, he was 21, and he didn't work out for the Oilers, but he too was an NHL player. So they got a track record of.
All right, is there a player, Bruce, that you're secretly hoping that they take? Off the ones that we named, do you have an irrational attachment to any one of them at this point? And I know that's, you try to contain that, but
yeah, we do.
Have you glommed on to anyone? I mean, listen, as we were talking about them, suddenly all of them were sounding pretty good.
Yeah. Well, these scouting reports, yeah. I mean, when you see compares to Leon Draisaitl, well, that's a bit of a magnet. Jack Quinn, that guy has he's got a lot going for him. And again, it could be just the thing of he's on a good team, and and he's in a featured spot, and he's the sniper on that team, and he's piling pucks in the net. On the other hand, you put a sniper in anything approaching a featured spot on the Edmonton Oilers, chances are he's going to snipe, because the Oilers have got playmakers. So
he played with Marco Rossi, right? In Ottawa, who's the 7th on our list, and Quinn is 14th on the consensus list. So, And I'm going to be updating this list in the next couple of days because I don't have Low Tide or Sean Patrick Ryan and a number of other
Right.
people. So I'll expand that, and these rankings will change a bit. And then the other people will, of course, be updating their lists.
That's
So
what I was
I'll
just going
keep
to say. You
updating
get to
as we go
spend
along.
another 10 hours doing the updates of the lists that people
It'll be
put out
fast.
already.
The updates will be faster because they usually keep the players in generally the same order and
Right.
just making small adjustments. So, alrighty, Bruce, thanks for talking today.
All right. Thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between time, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.